Well, good morning. This is Jim Whitehead of All Power Group. Today, one of my channels is all about animals, which, of course, I love. And also, my second love is coffee. And I didn't drink coffee until 2017. I always drank Diet Coke and Coke Zero for my caffeine. What a mistake that was. Now, my wife talked me into trying one of her cups of coffee, and boy, I said, I certainly have missed the boat for all these years of drinking Diet Coke and Coke Zero. And from that point, I wanted to learn everything I could about coffee, every aspect of it. So I spent probably most of 2018 studying coffee. Started my own coffee roasting business over in Davie, Florida. And even though I was in the generator business, this was an opportunity to look to the future. Now today, we're going to talk all about the two main types of beans. And later on in another presentation, I'll go into other aspects of different types of beans. And when I've got to say beans, I mean coffee beans that have not yet been ground down. And I'm going to get into that and why I say that. And hopefully all the things I come up with to talk about today will help you with your own coffee adventure. Okay. What we've got, and you're seeing, this is what we call the coffee belt. Now, the coffee belt is where around the whole equator, more or less, of the world, north of it and south of it is areas where coffee grows. Now, you're going to see, and I have a chart coming up that talks about two main beans. And again, as I said earlier, I'll be getting into other beans and some very interesting things with beans and how they're processed and so on and so forth. But here's just the one main point. The two beans I'm going to talk about today are called Arabica. And Arabica are more expensive, mainly because they can only grow at cooler altitudes. And that typically is 5,000 feet or higher. So right there, even if, and I'll get into climate change in a minute, but even if everything was the way it was many years ago, you would find that Arabica, because of the height and climate need, have to be grown at a higher altitude. The second bean I'm going to talk about are called Robusta. Robusta can be grown at much lower altitudes. So the point of where Robusta beans can be predominant, because again, of the coffee belt, a lot of the coffee belt is below 5,000 square feet. Now, one other aspect of the issue is that the climate change, and I don't think we all have to debate climate change. I know that you hear things where people say, no, it's imagination. But I know first case that being a generator company, I'm now a content creator, as you can guess, it started getting, and it still is getting, where it's hotter in Florida, South Florida. And every summer, we haven't got the statistic for this summer yet because we're not done, but every summer since 2014 has been, every summer has been hotter. So I had trouble, I'm 75 now, I'm 76. I had trouble starting at about 67 when I just really had trouble dealing with the heat. So I know firsthand that the climate issues are going up, and unfortunately, it's negatively affecting our coffee availability. Now, one side note related to, and we shouldn't even have to be worrying about this because coffee is expensive enough, but with the tariff issues, it could have where we will be paying more for coffee being imported into the United States or not. Some of it can be maybe where they carve it out as being where they don't raise or put a tariff on it, but we just don't know that. So that's why, in a sense, what I'm going to go through today, it's so important to buy coffee right and to grind it right, store it, and brew it. And that's what we're going to go today. So, yeah, there's the coffee belt. Yeah, we're losing some Arabica territory due to heat, kind of creeping up, you might say. The world's two most popular coffees, kind of just said this, was Arabica and Robusta. They thrive at distinctly different altitudes, a factor that significantly shapes their flavor profiles, resilience, and economic value. Now, Arabica, I don't think I've ever had Robusta. Now, Robusta is mainly used for instant coffee and other aspects of where it's not as critical to say, you know, you want the best beans with Arabica versus Robusta. You know, and again, in some cases you'd say, well, you know, I buy my instant coffee, you don't want that price to go up. So you're hoping that what they use to make, instant coffee with are cheaper beans, et cetera, and that's Robusta. Now, here's a chart, and, you know, you can pause that, take a picture of it. Bottom line, this really is the specific information that you would want to know related to the two types, Arabica or Robusta beans. Talking about feature, the flavor, caffeine, cost, bean shape, and common uses. And you'll see on, just to give you the example of why Robusta are not as good of beans, they use them for espresso blends for crema, which crema is the, top where you see like an orange foam. They use them for instant coffee and as a filler. Now, you know darn well you're going to pay less when something within your beans, if they said, okay, it's going to be a blend. And that's where you have to, to be honest with you, you have to really watch out for blends, because blends means it's got more than just one coffee. We call, and what we try to do on the Arabica side, we try to do what we do called single origin. That means these are beans that are from a different country or all different countries. And, you can pick up on the Arabica side a distinct where you'd say, oh, this is Ethiopian, this is Vietnamese, et cetera, et cetera. But when you see the blend, you got to be careful because some of the best coffees in the world, a coffee that's grown in Jamaica, and Kona coffee that's grown in Hawaii. And of course, it's only grown in Hawaii at the higher altitudes. You will find if you buy the single origin of either of those two coffees, they're a lot more expensive, 4, 5, 6 times. But when you might see where it says, and this is where you have to be watch out for, if it says a Kona, Kona blend, that means it only has to be a very small percentage by rule of, when they say Kona, it's a very low percentage, between 10 and 20% of that coffee. But who knows what the rest of the coffee is? Beans. So you might say, wow, I got a real good deal on this Kona blend. Well, by rule, it's a very low percentage of Kona coffee, and who knows what else they put in there to fill up the bag. Anyway, so you see the chart. Very important kind of to give you some of the intricacies of what these coffees can do and what they do. But while traditional altitudes ranges have long established, the pressures of changing climate are forcing a dynamic shift in where these coffee beans can be successfully cultivated, generally pushing growers to higher elevations. Now, one thing I also want to say about Arabica, they're a little bit more finicky and they are more prone to coffee diseases or coffee insect infestation. So, they'll say, well, yeah, we lost a lot of our Arabica. So, since Robusta is much more tolerant, they do what they feel they have to do. Anyway, I know. So there's the chart. Arabica revered for its complex aromatics and nuanced flavors. Arabica is a high-altitude plant. It flourishes in the world's equatorial regions known as the Bean Belt, but at elevations that provide a cooler, more temperate climate. And that's why we're saying there, the more higher altitude land they lose because of the temperatures going up, they lose growing space. Generally, the ideal altitude for Arabica cultivation ranges from 1,800 to 6,300 feet. Now in metric, that's 550 to 1,900 meters. However, this is a broad guideline, and the the altitude varies significantly by region. They're influenced by latitude and local microclimates. So again, I'm just keep pushing on and saying what's going on here. Now, Latin America, as you know from the map, is in the coffee belt. But countries like Colombia, and if you remember, you're probably too young for this, but they had Juan Valdez, where he was going into Colombia and picking beans. And, he had they don't do it this way too much, or they don't actually, but you'd see him with a bag, with a donkey. And he'd be the Juan Valdez, that would be going and picking those beans. And you'd say, does he do that by himself? Anyway, a lot of the big coffee growing areas, especially in the Robusta area, Brazil, they use machines. They shake the trees, and by the way, they don't come off as coffee beans. They are what they call cherries, and cherries have to be ripe. If you pick them before they're ripe, the coffee bean that's inside or seed is not ready for harvesting and processing. Anyway, Colombia, the powerhouse of high-quality Arabica coffee, is traditionally grown at altitudes between 4,000 and 6,500 feet, about 1,200 to 2,000 meters. The country's mountainous terrain provides a variety of microclimates within this range, contributing to the diverse flavor profiles of its coffees. Now, in Central America, nations such as Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, premium Arabica is also cultivated at high altitudes, often between 3,500 and 5,500 feet, and that's in metric, that's 1,070 to 1,675 meters. Now, let's now talk a little about, and I'm hoping I'm giving you a good scope of the world, and it's probably one of those things where you'd love to have the opportunity to travel to any of these locations. Anyway, the birthplace of Arabica is Ethiopia. And I have had, in my time, grinding and buying and grinding and brewing, I do like Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. Anyway, Ethiopia boasts some of the highest coffee growing regions in the world. Here, Arabica is cultivated at altitudes ranging from 4,900 to 7,200 feet. That's in metric 1,500 to 2,200 meters. These extreme altitudes contribute to the uniquely floral and fruity notes characteristic of Ethiopian coffees. Now, I got to be honest, when you buy coffee, especially the Arabica, it will say, tastes like chocolate, that. I got to be honest, I can never really tell because, one, I don't drink black coffee. And if you want to pick up some of the nuances of the particular coffee, you got to kind of drink it black, and you've got to make sure you grind it correctly, and we're going to get into that, and to brew it correctly. So it's really easy. I know they say on the bag of coffee that it's this, and it tastes like that, tastes like that, tastes like that. It's hard to say because there's so many variables. Now, talking about Asia, in Asian coffee-producing countries like Indonesia, particularly on islands such as Sumatra and Java, Arabica is typically grown at altitudes between 3,000 feet and 5,000 feet. That's about 900 to 1,500 meters. Now, let's talk about Robusta. Robusta is, the scientific name is Coffea canephora. Again, you won't be tested on any of this, but as its name suggests, Robusta is a more resilient and hardy species capable of withstanding warmer temperatures and harsher conditions than Arabica. This is reflected in its preference for lower altitudes. So hopefully it doesn't get where our climate gets to a point where either A, they can't grow very much Arabica, or even less so that the prices go up. So the optimal altitude range for Robusta is generally between sea level and 2,600 feet, approximately 0 to 800 meters for metric. Now, Southwest Asia, Vietnam, the world's leading producer of Robusta, cultivates its coffee primarily in central highlands as altitudes range from 1,600 to 3,300 feet. That's 500 to 1,000 meters. While this overlaps with the lower end of the Arabica range, the warmer temperatures in these regions are ideal for Robusta. And also, where I mentioned that Arabica is more sensitive to, the temperature issue and so on and so forth, and diseases that hit the coffee plant. And a lot of times, if it's bad enough, the poor coffee grower has to destroy the trees and replant them. Now that like sounds like, well, yeah, you take the plant down, put a new one in. No, I mean, when they have to do that, it's expensive, and it takes a while for that plant, tree, bush to grow to where it's producing coffee again. So really, really pretty creepy. Now, let's talk about Africa. In African nations that are significant Robusta producers, such as Uganda, cultivation also occurs at lower elevations, typically below 4,000 feet, which is 1,200 meters. Now, I'm obviously this is a trip around the world. South America, in Brazil, they are a massive producer, a major producer of both Arabica and Robusta. Robusta, known locally as Canelon, is grown in the hotter lower-lying regions, often at altitudes below 2,000 feet, 600 meters. The upward creep climate changes influence a critical factor shaping the current and future altitudes of coffee cultivation. It's climate change. Rising global temperatures are rendering many traditional coffee growing areas unsuitable, particularly for more sensitive Arabica beans. As a result, farmers are increasingly being forced to seek out higher, cooler elevations to maintain viable coffee production. Now, these plantations, it isn't where they say, well, we're right next to a very tall mountain. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the right or the ownership of that new land area to say, well, we're just, going to go up higher up on that mountain and we're just going to grow coffee. It really, either A, they can't do it, or B, they have to come up with some maybe money sharing opportunity or rental. And the one thing on the point with coffee farmers, in the money aspect, even though they're the ones that do all the planting, all the, harvesting, all the processing of the coffee, they're the least paid, which makes no sense. It's not fair, but it's just the way it is. And they get into things like fair trade or free trade to try to make it where these coffee farmers get at least proper money to make sure they're viable and can handle it. Anyway, so they get into this where the altitude is not what they need to do. So that a lot of times the livelihoods of farmers gets established in lower altitude regions. The need to adapt to these changing conditions, the pressuring pressing issue for global coffee industry, with growing focus on developing more climate resilient coffee varieties and sustainable farmer practices. Okay, now let's talk about grinding your coffee. Excuse me if this is a little bit longer today, but the point of what I wanted to get into this is to make sure you have all the information to hopefully upgrade, if you need to, your coffee type, how you handle it, how you brew it, how you grind it. Okay, what you're looking at here are what they call burr grinders, and they kind of, one goes on top of the other and they spin. Other methods don't do a good job of, when you dial in a certain grind setting, the burr grinders work very well. And the better the burr grinders work better. So if you're going to get a grinder, get one that has burr grinding devices in them. Now, the good news is, as you see, it isn't where you go, oh, I don't have the money to spend on a big, expensive, coffee grinder. I have had these and I've given them away at times. The hand cranking is fine. It has the burr grinders inside, and you adjust so that whatever grind size is what you can do. And, this is certainly, unless you're, a unbelievable need for, toys, I guess you might say, a hand grinder is fine. Now, the one thing I need to stress over and over again, do not buy in the supermarket or anywhere else beans that have already been ground. Because the minute you grind a coffee bean, it starts to lose some of its properties. Because really, if you think about it, when you turn a bean into powder, there's a lot more surface area. And air and oxygen is a real problem for coffee beans. And I'll get into some other things that you need to do, even if you do grind, of how you take care of them. Now, here's this is a Ciedo, and again, if I mention any of these names, it's not that I'm trying to sell anything, but I've had these grinders and they're extremely reliable. And when you dial in a grind size for whatever coffee you're going to do, and we'll get into all the types of coffees, this is a burr grinder, and you can control on the top whatever, fine, not as fine, coarse, and we'll show you some examples of that. But these really crank fast and you're ready to roll. Okay, this is what you would see with a fine grind, and there's different variations of this, and when we get to these two types, you'll find which size grind of the bean you should actually do. This would be considered a larger coarse grind, and again, there's so much in between, and you really have to, and that's why if you get a good grinder, you'll get used to the size grind that you should put out to do the best for what you're trying to brew. So you must match the grind size to your brewing time. And again, I know a lot of this, don't worry, you won't be tested, but I'm just trying to make sure that you kind of get an idea as to all the things that you can do. Now, for example, if it's too fine, if your grind is too fine for your brew, let's say, example, espresso grind in a French press, the water will extract too much, resulting in bitter, harsh, and over-extracted cup. If it's too coarse, it basically, the water will pass through too quickly, resulting in a sour, weak, and under-extracted cup. So, again, this is where you really have to, and the fun part of it is, you learn, you test, you try, and you'll come up with the best combination of coffee grind size, and how you brew it. Anyway, the general guide, extra coarse. So if you have extra coarse coffee, and again, this you might say, well, I this is what I wanted. It's best for cold brew. Now, cold brew is not where, and I'll talk about the difference, but cold brew is where you have a very coarse grind, and you put it in, there's so many different devices, but you put in the coffee on the top, you put water, and it basically slowly extracts down into the lower portion of this device. And a lot of times it might even be where, you might set it up at night and you might have cold brew ready for the morning. Now, we will talk about the differences between cold brew and iced coffee. You might say, what's the difference? Well, we'll tell you. So now, if you have a little less coarse, but still coarse, it's good for what you're looking at as a French press. And again, what you do with that is you put the coffee, water, and you just keep pushing down, and it filters up and basically, presses the coffee. And these are pretty good. I've not actually tried one. I've tried so many of them. Now we get down to what we call, if you've got a medium drip, coffee makers, this is a good drip coffee maker. Put the coffee at the top, a filter, and you let it filter down. Now, if you've got a fine grind or you want to do espresso, and, I've had quite a few different espresso machines, and how these work, and it really, again, gets into the grind size, but it pushes water through at a certain pressure. And you can vary the pressure a little bit, but typically it's what they call 9 bars. And again, you time it, and it's kind of fun. You put it on a scale, and you keep working at it to try to get the best combination to get a great espresso. Now, what's interesting on that is you might have one particular bean that you're using today, and tomorrow you have another bean and you want to do an espresso. You might have to test it first, testing the grind, testing what it comes out at, and so on and so forth. And the time and the weight, I mean, it's just, it's almost like you have to be a rocket scientist to get this, how would you say, perfect. But there's a lot of variation between good, or not good, good, and the best. So you can experiment. It's kind of fun. I have scales, and I can go on and on and on. Now, if you want a Turkish coffee, you're going to use this Turkey coffee brewer, and it's going to be very, very fine coffee. So again, you have to know how you're going to brew it to dial in the correct coffee bean grinding size. Now, this is extremely interesting and important. By the way, when you do have coffee beans and you roast them, these are roasted. Now, what happens is, for about 3 days after roasting, there's nitrogen gas in the beans. And accordingly, you want to get a container, and I have a bunch of these of different types, large, small. You want a container that has what we call a one-way valve. The one-way valve has it where the nitrogen escapes out into the air. Oxygen or air does not get in. So after about 3 or 4 days of rest, after roasting, and you put them in this type of device, they're not expensive, it is time to enjoy the coffee. Now, speaking about, and this is one of my big pet peeves, when you go into anywhere to buy coffee, and if you buy it directly from a coffee, roastery, they will typically, if they are doing it correctly, and I would expect they will, their coffee will have a date roasted on it. So if you're buying it, let's say this is saying it was roasted on August 12th, you will say, okay, and it will go in and should be in a bag that also has a one-way valve. So, when it's sitting, being ready for sale, it's able to give off the nitrogen with the one-way valve in the bag itself without letting any air in because it's sealed other than that one-way valve. So you want to go, okay, this coffee was, roasted on the 12th. It probably has to rest until about the 14th, 15th, somewhere in that range. And then you can open it up and either, just use what you're going to use and put it back in the bag and seal, or you use one of the devices containers that I showed you. And that's what I typically do. When I open up the bag, I put it in there, take out what I need, and close it right up. Now, what you will see, and this is, in my opinion, a real disservice to the coffee business, is where they might have, for best results, brew before some date in the future. No, that is wrong. Because one, you don't know when it was brewed, and they put brew before this date, or best if brewed before this date. Very, I don't want to say it's trickery, but it's trickery, where you don't know when it was roasted, and you don't know how long it's been in that bag. And, if they say July 25th, 2026, they might have roasted it who knows how long ago. So make sure you buy coffee, and it isn't where you're going to spend more money technically, but you want to see when the coffee was roasted. And when I was doing my coffee roasting, I had, a stamp, and it was very accurate. At stickers, I would stamp roasted on this particular date. And really, if you have it for too long, it probably is where either you're going to end up giving it away or using it yourself, because, again, it's not fair to the customer. Okay, so we've gotten through that. So specialty coffee typically will have the roasted on date instead of the expiration date. And that expiration date is, how would you say, arbitrary? They don't know. If they say, I brewed it today, and I'm going to put a date on the bag that's now sealed that use it before 3-4 months from now. No. It all gets, it depends on where it is, how it was transported, too many variables. And I don't want to say dishonesty, but I'm going to say dishonesty as to you not knowing whether it's old coffee or not old coffee. And when you get into these, and I admit in my coffee career, my first coffee maker was a Keurig. Nothing wrong with Keurig, but you're putting these coffee pods, and the coffee in the pod has been ground. And who knows when it was ground. And they put it in this little, pouch or whatever, and you don't know how long it's been sitting in a warehouse before it went to a store, before it was bought. So definitely some real red flags. Now, here's a question. Fresh agricultural product whose flavor degrades over time, it doesn't expire in food safety sense for a very long time, but its quality and flavor and peak will also decline. And the coffee flavor, it's best brewed between 3 and 4 days after its roasted date. And, it's good, and I don't mean after 2 weeks, it's bad. It's just it has lost some of its best qualities. And we showed the process of, making sure that your beans, when they're roasted, it has a way of having the one-way system that can basically let out that nitrogen. After a few weeks, by the way, if you just keep your coffee, it causes the volatile aromatic compounds to break down, resulting in a flat, woody, or stale taste. So again, if you find that it's tasting as described, sad to say, it doesn't mean you can't use it. It doesn't mean that it's going to hurt you, but you're not going to get the best coffee. That's just the way it is. Now, so that's why it's so important to follow the date and ensure you know when it was roasted. Okay, what does sour and bitter mean? Question. I hear baristas talk about coffee being under-extracted, over-extracted. How can I taste the difference? Answer. Extraction is the process of dissolving coffee solubles into water. The goal is a balanced extraction, which is typically between 18 to 22% of the coffee mass. Under extraction, it will be sour. This happens when not enough flavor has been pulled from the coffee, the brew time might be too short, the water too cool, or the grind too coarse. I think you get from this, it's very, important to make sure you do it right. And you'll get good at it, and it isn't where that if it isn't good, you can't drink it. No, but you learn and keep making things better for the next time. The dominant taste is a sharp, unpleasant sourness, like an unripe fruit, because the acids are extracted first. The coffee will also taste weak and lack any natural sweetness. Now, if the bitter happens when too much flavor has been pulled from the coffee, including undesirable compounds. The brew time might be too long, the water too hot, or the grind too fine. Now, I know some of you say, hey, I want that Keurig with the little pods. And again, what I found when that was my first coffee maker is the Keurigs brew at too low a temperature. The best brewing temperatures are 195 degrees to 205 degrees. Keurigs are about 190, give or take 187. And that's mainly because, and that's why it's good just not to use these if you can. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pick on Keurig, but that's, not standard brewing temperature. But they do that because if they go into that 195 to 205 range, and this is creepy, the plastic pod that the coffee's in can actually melt a little. So that's going right into your coffee. So you're drinking brewed coffee with some of the plastic. Scary. So anyway, that's the choice. So, okay, now we're getting close to the end, and thank you very much for being here. Water for coffee. Does it really matter? Now, again, this is third wave water. Again, I'm not selling it. I use it. And there aren't a lot of, different products that are in this category. But the question is, does the water matter? Do I really need special water for my coffee, or is tap water fine? So the answer to that is yes, it matters. So, I know all I've gone through is it's where you're saying, I don't know if I should even get into this because there's so many variables. But it's fun. And you become, over time, a master brewer, master grinder, and the coffee tastes better. And then maybe you say, I want to go into the business. By the way, I can always help people. That's what I like to do. Anyway, yes, the type of water does matter immensely. Your brewed coffee, and this is a point that you need to think of, is over 98%. So its mineral content has a huge impact on flavor. Now, distilled or soft water lacks the minerals like magnesium and calcium needed to bond with to extract the flavorful compounds in the coffee. This results in a flat, dull, and uninteresting cup. That's a good way to describe it. Hard water contains too many minerals. This can lead to over-extraction, creating a chalky or bitter taste. It also causes scale buildup in your brewing equipment. So what you're seeing here is where you buy these, and they're not expensive. Now, my water here, because I'm on well water, and I have what they call reverse osmosis, which the good news is it comes out as very clean, bacteria-free water, but you've lost most of the mineral content. So even though the water is good from the point of view of safety, it's terrible for coffee brewing. So these, and you can get different sizes and whether you're going to, what type of water, and I have a gallon jug I use. This basically will put into the water you just took out of the reverse osmosis tap in the sink, kitchen sink, to bring up the mineral content to ensure you have a good tasting coffee if everything else is fine. So it's got to have a balanced mineral content. According to the Specialty Coffee Association, and they have some really big rules, the SCA, the target is a total dissolved solids, again, don't worry too much about this, TDS level of around 150 parts per million. For most people, using a simple carbon filter like a Brita pitcher is a huge step up from plain tap water. Now, cold brew versus iced coffee. You might think, what's the difference? There is a big difference. The difference, cold brew and iced coffee. While both are served cold, they are made using fundamentally different methods. The result is a very different taste profile. Iced coffee, this is coffee that is brewed hot using a standard method like a drip machine, and that's what you're looking at, and then cooled down often by pouring it directly over ice. Theoretically, yes, you will end up having iced coffee. But if you think about it, it's hot. You put it over ice, and if the ice didn't melt, that'd be fine because it would make it cold. But the ice melts, so guess what it does? It dilutes the coffee. So somebody says, oh, yeah, iced coffee and cold brew is the same thing. It's not. It's not. So get that right out of your head. Okay, the hot brewing extracts the same compounds as a regular cup, including the more volatile acids. So, the best way if you want cold coffee or, and I'm actually drinking that now myself. But again, I'm not doing anything with ice. Now, cold brew is made by steeping coarse grounds in a cold or room temperature water for a long period, 12 to 24 hours. Time replaces heat in the extraction process because it's never heated. Far fewer of acidic and bitter compounds are extracted from the beans. The result, cold brew is naturally sweeter, much smoother, and significantly less acidic than iced coffee. And, really, the equipment that if you want to make cold brew, I had one that, again, it was a glass, I would put my coffee and water, and good water, and I would let it work all night. Admittedly, they have times you can do this and that, and it will speed up the process. Just have it where these devices are so inexpensive, it doesn't mean you say, well, I got to wait to have coffee. No, you don't. Just prepare, a container of what's been processed as cold brew. And before you run out of that, you have done it again. Okay, now let's talk about, and I know this is a bit long, and I apologize. It's about the longest I've ever done, but light versus dark roast. Which has more caffeine? Question, what has more caffeine, a light roast or a dark roast coffee? Answer. This is a classic trick question. The answer depends on how you measure the coffee, the roasting process. It burns off some of the bean mass and caffeine, but it also causes the bean to expand. If you measure by scoops, volume, a scoop of light roast coffee will be slightly more caffeine. This is because the beans are denser and haven't expanded as much, so more bean mass fits into the scoop. And I know you're saying, oh, come on, Jim, you're getting a little carried away here, but bottom line, I always like to tell the truth. If you measure by weight, a gram of dark roast coffee will slightly have more caffeine. This is because as a bean roasts, it loses mass water weight faster than it loses caffeine. To get 15 grams of dark roast, you need more individual beans than you would for 15 grams of a light roast, if you kind of get the logic here. In practical terms, the difference is very small and likely unnoticeable for the average coffee drinker. The choice between light and dark roast should be based on your flavor preference, not the caffeine content. You know, if you're saying, well, the coffee I make and I love, I don't feel the caffeine hit, have a second cup of coffee. I mean, somebody would say, well, gee, should I fly to the moon? No, just have another cup of coffee. It's really that simple. So anyway, that's, again, what a device for making the cold brew. And boy, I've made it to the end. I really hope you learned something. I know it's been about almost an hour of my life I've spent talking about this. Again, I appreciate you being here. And, this is hopefully a resource. And it isn't where you have to sit down and say, I have to watch the whole thing. You can split it up. I even said, for looking at the Arabica and Robusta chart, you can start and stop. Whatever you want to learn and take notes, this will have it where, honestly, it will improve the coffee that you're consuming. And the honest truth is, if you go to the supermarket, they have so many ground coffee choices. And I have looked, you don't find many, if any, whole bean coffee. Most of what you go into the supermarket, it's been ground, and it will have best used by 2027. I mean, you'd say, I don't think that's a good idea, because all the time, even though it's in a bag and sealed, it still loses some of its wonderful potential taste. And in other words, don't do that. And you can buy about the same coffee. And admittedly, the only variable here is whether you buy Robusta or Arabica, and when it was roasted. So thank you. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you get something out of this. And thanks again.